Hi there. Welcome to Church for Skeptics. This is the third video, short video, about Darwinian evolution. I think it is a preposition, that's not the right word, presupposition that needs to be demolished. And I hope this is a friendly discussion. I have a lot of friends who think that evolution is just a fact, and I disagree with them, so I'm going to talk about that. The difficulty is I'm trying to do this in short bites so you don't get bogged down with it. So 5 to 8 minutes maybe, and you can't cover that much. So hopefully I'll do a better job of producing more, and you can digest these a little bit at a time, one bite at a time. To review just a bit, Darwinian evolution, I think, is the there is no God theory. I think that's the reason for it. I think it's tried to make it illogical. It's kind of a brilliant idea in some aspects to show that there is no God, no design, no purpose behind the universe itself as it has come to be. Darwin didn't talk about that at all. But think about it like this. Richard Dawkins, I've said this before, says that Darwin's greatest contribution was to make atheism reasonable. Now that means that, at least in modern times, atheism hinges on Darwinian evolution. So if Darwinian evolution comes on hard times, atheism has come on hard times. They go together. They're Siamese twins, so to speak. Well, I think in past videos, I think it has come on hard times, given now we're trying to explain things by a multiverse for which there's zero evidence. You can make an algorithm for it, by the way. You can make an algorithm for everything. And panspermia, where did life come from? Well, maybe aliens seeded the planet, or maybe just biological living organisms collided with us from another planet. Anyway, it's just idea after idea after idea that just becomes more and more science fiction. And science fiction is not all that bad either, but when it comes to reality and facts, that's what we want to talk about. So I want to know, if I'm a Christian, I'm a creationist, and I want to know. But I think this idea of evolution, Darwinian evolution at least, being the no God theory is borne out by history. T.H. Huxley and members of the so-called X Club set out to make science completely secular. That was their stated purpose. And by that, and by the way, this is in conjunction with Darwin's Origin of the Species, and there were several others, by the way, before Darwin, who had the same idea of natural selection over time changes. Not just Darwin. He got popularized for it, of course, and I presume made some money for it. But the idea is this: only, nothing but natural laws and forces operate in the universe. There is no God, no where, no how, no time. It's the there is no God theory. So I want to chip away from it. By the way, technically, the word evolution just means change over time. Well, I'm all in for that. I'm 71 years old. I believe in change over time for sure. But Darwinian evolution is about a couple linchpins here in this brief video. Number one, common descent. And that means that all living things can be traced back to one, the original living thing, which would have come about. Darwin didn't know, didn't address that really. But you can speculate if everything happens by chance and everything goes back to one. Darwin had one picture in his book. It was the tree of life, and you get down to the root of that, it's the one. Now, Darwin did allow that maybe there were simultaneously, independently, a few origins of life. But the idea is from one living molecule, one organic molecule, from that one cell, the trillions of cells, living cells in our body evolved by chance. So you have one theory is common descent. What can happen a little bit can happen a lot, and it happens so much that everything comes from one thing. And here's the other linchpin here is that evolution is dependent on chance. It's not by design. That's the heart of the theory here. And the other part of the linchpin is this: there are no limits to the change. If dogs can produce by change, either by design or maybe even by chance, if a wolf can breed and breed and breed and breed and turn into a dachshund, then everything can produce everything else. There are no limits, in other words, to this. Well, on Darwin, of course, the one living cell over time became us. So here's the other linchpin that I want to talk about. It means that you have to go from simple things like the first living cell. We thought it was more simple than it really is, but given that the simple has to go from simple to complex. So here you have no problem with change over time. I have a problem with common descent, by chance, simple to complex, producing everything without God. So how could this magnificent change from simple to complex by chance over millions and millions of years, how could that happen? Well, you have two things that drive it. One is natural selection. We'll talk about that in the next video more. And the second one is mutations. It happens, things change over time, and they're either naturally favorable or unfavorable. They either live or they don't, and you have to live. Not only do you have to live, you have to produce kids. So you have reproduction. So it's natural selection and mutations. There are other nuances, continental drift and those kind of things, adaptations. But the heart of it is those two things drive Darwinian evolution. And he talked about natural selection. He didn't even know what mutations were, but we know what they are. And he had a pretty good idea about that things change over time in their reproductive process. He, of course, used finches, the birds who have long beaks and short beaks, and the long-beaked finches, it's hard to say, the long-beaked finches did better and produced more populations when weather was colder. So their environment, that's natural selection. It's about environment. Now, I want to read you a couple things here from evolutionists. This is important. The first thing I want to read you is from a professor, well-known evolutionist. I'll go ahead and give his name. It's public. Professor G.A. Kirkett, a well-known British authority on invertebrates. Here's what he says. And when Richard Dawkins says evolution is a fact, what is he talking about? What is evolution that he's making a fact about? Well, I think there's some facts involved, but not in what he calls evolution, Now, here's what the evolutionist, well-known British authority on invertebrates says. He distinguishes between the special, note the word special theory of evolution, as opposed to the general theory of evolution. Note the word special. Special leads to species, get it? And it's a fact. Speciation is a fact. That's why we have dog breeds, cat breeds, lots of breeds, finch breeds, and so forth. I'm going to read what it says here. This is from him. He argued, by the way, that the general theory of evolution, which is if you can have species, you can have have everything. And here's what he says. This theory can be called the general theory of evolution. Now, we would call that macro evolution, major evolution. Everything comes from one, common descent. This theory can be called the general theory of evolution, and the evidence that supports it is not sufficiently strong to allow us to consider it as anything more than a working hypothesis. It is not clear whether the changes that brought about speciation, different species of different kinds, it is not clear whether the changes that bring about speciation are of the same nature as those that brought about the development of new phyla. Phyla is the biblical word would be kinds. Remember, note Genesis. I'm a Genesis guy. It says that God created all these different kinds and that they would reproduce after their own kinds. Well, within those kinds, there are different species. There's a dog kind and lots of species, lots of breeds of dogs, but they're all dogs. All the finches, short beak, long beak, no beak, they're all finches. Moths are moths. Flies are flies, bacteria are bacteria, and so forth and so on. And so, again, that's what he's talking about, phyla. And he says, let me say it again, it is not clear whether the changes that bring about speciation, different breeds, are of the same nature as those that brought about the development of new phyla. Now, he's assuming that new phyla have developed via mutations and natural selection. So we're talking about limits here. Major divisions of living things, and that's what he describes as phyla, of which there are about 80, including microbes. And then he says the answer will be found in future experimental work and not by the dogmatic assertions that the general theory of evolution must be correct because there is nothing else that will satisfactorily take its place except for creation. In 1980, there was a billed as historic conference at the Chicago Field of Natural History with the world's leading biologists. Excuse me. And reporting in the journal Science that same year, here's what was reported by the journal regarding this conference. The central question of the Chicago conference was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution, that's speciation, different dog breeds, different moth breeds, different colors, different beaks, and so forth. The general question was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution can be extrapolated to explain the phenomena of macroevolution. That's the general theory of evolution. It's like the Three Musketeers, all is one and one is all. It all came from one and one produced all. At the risk of doing violence, now watch this is the Science Journal, at the risk of doing violence to the positions of some of the people at the meeting, the answer can be given as a clear no. In other words, microevolution, I think, is a fact. Does that automatically lead to macroevolution? And the answer, according to the Science Journal, is no. Now, I'm sure somebody would say in the last 42 years since then, surely we've come further than that. But I want to conclude here with this. Let me switch my page. Is evolution a fact? Yes and no. The Bible claims, of course, and that's where we're ultimately headed, maybe you might consider that. The Bible claims that living things were created according to their kind and reproduce, and of course the idea of being created is another video, and they reproduce after their kind, after their phyla, which is the question that they're asking. Can speciation, microevolution, reproducing different species after their own kind, can that lead to macroevolution, the general theory of evolution, different families, everything coming from one, common descent? So, in that I would say no. I want to, in the next video, I'm going to talk about the two factors, the two driving forces for evolution, natural selection and mutations, neither of which point explicitly to evolution. So if somebody says that evolution is a fact, they might mean natural selection and mutations. Those are facts, but they don't lead to macroevolution. Natural selection, for example, is about the survival of the fittest. It explains nothing about the arrival of the fittest. How did that species get to be what it is in the first place? And of course, you can bring mutations into the game. And then you have to go from simple to complex, and I don't think mutations can do the job. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again, hopefully in the next one. Take care. Have a good day.